Hello, it's Mr. Schramm, and I am back again with another anatomy walkthrough lesson. We moved on to Unit 4, and that is all about the nervous system. So we're going to introduce the nervous system right now. So what's the nervous system? It's the command center for the body. Through a series of electrical impulses in the body, the nervous system is able to give and receive messages. And the nervous system is not isolated to one area of the body. It's present in all parts of your body. And that's because it has very important functions. And some of those functions are to evaluate internal and external information to make any necessary adjustments. It's also responsible for all movements and activities within the body. And it regulates what we learn and remember. So let's examine how the nervous system evaluates internal and external information to make any necessary adjustments. Imagine you're outside on a pretty hot day. Your nervous system receives the message that it is hot outside. Then it sends a message to your sweat glands to release a salt-based liquid, sweat, to prevent your body from overheating. So this bodily function is known as perspiration or sweating. Your nervous system will also evaluate how the organs within your body are adjusting to the increase in temperature. If it receives a message that your body is dehydrated, that there's a lack of water, it will send a warning to you by making you feel thirsty. Your nervous system is also responsible for all movements and activities within the body. So, for example, it controls how fast your heart beats, how gracefully you dance, how quickly you react, how forgetful you are, and when you blush, when your cheeks get all rosy. The list goes on and on. Gratefully, your nervous system works so quickly and efficiently, you don't even realize how much it does. It just kind of does its own thing without you even thinking about it. So, how does it regulate what we learn and remember? Every day, your nervous system is bombarded with messages and cues. It gets messages all day long about all types of stuff within your body. Therefore, it must filter which things are important to actually remember. Learning not to touch a hot stove is immediately identified as important. However, how to shoot a perfect layup may not seem as important to your survival. That is one reason why practice is so important. Repeating something acts as a signal that it is important to remember for your body. You only have to touch a stove once, really, for your body to be afraid or take note of how painful that is. But you usually have to practice a sport or anything like art for you to get really good at that thing. The nervous system is able to function because of neurons. And these neurons are specialized cells that transmit information through the nervous system by electrical impulses. Neuroglia are accessory cells that support these neurons. And here we get a good picture of a neuron and how it's structured. Structurally, the nervous system is divided into two parts. We have the central nervous system, and we call that the CNS, or the peripheral nervous system, and that's the PNS. So we have the central and then peripheral, meaning not the central one. Now, that central nervous system is comprised of the brain itself and your spinal cord. So things along the center of your body. While the peripheral nervous system includes the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. The cranial nerves originate from your brain, so up here. And then the spinal nerves originate from the spinal cord. Functionally, the nervous system is divided into two main systems. You have your somatic nervous system and then autonomic nervous system. Now, the somatic nervous system carries impulses to and from the central nervous system to skeletal muscle tissue. Its primary function is to generate skeletal muscle movements. Then you have your autonomic nervous system, and that carries impulses to and from the rest of your body. So, for example, your heart, your digestive system, and other glands. So we have somatic nervous system and then autonomic. The responsibilities of the nervous system include evaluating internal and external information to make any necessary adjustments, controlling all movements and activities within the body, and regulating what we learn and remember. And remember the structures of the nervous system. It's divided into two parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And then functionally, it's divided into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. So that was the end of the intro. And I'll slip on by to the next section, the central nervous system 1. So we're going to be talking about the brain. Now, your brain is a very interesting organ. Did you know there are 100,000 miles, yes, miles worth of blood vessels in your brain? Your brain also doesn't feel pain. 4-day-old newborns can differentiate between languages, which is really amazing if you think about it. So a 4-day-old baby can tell between languages, between the different sounds humans are making. Each part of the brain has a special role to do, and it's divided into 3 main sections. You have your forebrain, your midbrain, and your hind brain. And we'll look at each of those. The forebrain is the anterior or front portion of the brain. It's the largest portion of the brain. It has a lot of vital functions, such as thinking, talking, sensory processing, so processing the things you sense the world with, your body temperature, your heartbeat, and your emotions. And that forebrain is divided into 2 sections, the telencephalon and the diencephalon. So right here, out here is the telencephalon, and then within here is the diencephalon. The telencephalon is the section of the forebrain that contains the cerebrum. And the cerebrum is your largest part of the brain. In fact, it's responsible for about 80% of the mass of your brain. And here we get a nice colored representation of the parts of the lobes in your brain. The cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, kind of like how the earth is divided into hemispheres. Think of a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. Your right hemisphere controls movements of the left side of your body. So your right hemisphere controls your left body side. And it also regulates spatial and generally artistic skills, while the left hemisphere controls movements of the right side of your body. And it manages analytical and verbal skills, such as reading, writing, and arithmetic. And we all use all of our brain at different times. Anyway, the two hemispheres are connected together by the corpus callosum. There are 5 lobes of the cerebrum. We have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the insula. And the insula is deep within the brain, and you can't see that part. But we'll learn more about that later. The cerebrum has 2 layers. The cerebral cortex, which is the superficial layer, so the part we can see when you analyze a brain, and that's comprised of gray matter, and it creates the convolutions of the brain. Now, what do we mean by convolutions? So the folds and little grooves and creases in a brain are called convolutions. And the second layer is called the cerebral medulla, and that is the central layer comprised of white matter. So the cerebral cortex is the wrinkly part you see, and that has gray matter. And then the layer underneath that, we have the cerebral medulla with white matter. Moving on to the diencephalon, that's the portion of the forebrain that contains the thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. The thalamus is this large oval mass below the cerebral hemispheres, and it acts as the relay center for sensory impulses, except for the sense of smell. That's dealt elsewhere. Your hypothalamus is a part of the diencephalon located inferiorly or below the thalamus. Although the hypothalamus is small, it has some big responsibilities. The hypothalamus regulates your heartbeat, your body temperature, fluid retention, so how much fluid you're storing in your body, your hunger and thirst, your emotions, and your endocrine functions. Then we have the pituitary gland. That is attached below, inferiorly to the hypothalamus. And here is where several hormones are produced. So in this tiny little gland, that is where a lot of hormones are made. So that was the forebrain. Now we're moving to the midbrain section. And that is located just superior to the pons. And the pons is part of the hind brain. So we'll talk about that after this. But this midbrain is also known as the mesencephalon. It's responsible for visual and auditory reflexes. So visual as in your eyes, you're seeing. Auditory deals with your hearing, your posture, and movement, your actual movement. And then you get to your hind brain, and that's the posterior part of the brain. So towards the back, that is divided into the metencephalon and the myencephalon. Myelencephalon. Sorry. Metencephalon and the myelencephalon. So that first part, the metencephalon, resides right here, and we have the pons and the cerebellum down there. The pons is the rounded protrusion inferior to the brain, and that helps to relay messages and also helps with your breathing. The cerebellum is the second largest structure of the brain. In Latin, its name means little brain. So it's a tiny looking brain-like structure. And it's located below and to the back of the rest of your brain. So similar to the cerebrum that we talked about earlier, the cerebellum, the tiny brain, has two layers. And the outer layer is comprised of gray matter, and that's known as the cerebellar cortex. The central layer comprised of white matter is called the arbor vitae. Arbor vitae. And the arbor vitae is Latin for tree of life, which is fitting considering it looks like a tree with branches. The cerebellum coordinates movement, your body's balance, and your body's posture. The hindbrain also has the myelencephalon. And here we have the medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata is a portion of the brainstem that is connected to the pons and the spinal cord. I'm sure you can think of a movie that references this part of the brain. Solid movie for sure. But this medulla oblongata includes a sensory relay for the cranial nerves. It also regulates your heartbeat, your blood pressure, and your breathing. It also controls sneezing, coughing, swallowing, and vomiting. So things that are trying to eject certain things from your body. The medulla oblongata is also where the nerve fibers of each hemisphere cross over. So this allows the right hemisphere to receive and send information to the left side of your body, and the left hemisphere to receive and send information to your right side of the body. So remember, there's a crisscross. Your left controls your right, and your right controls your left. So in conclusion, we're going to review some of this stuff. We have the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hind brain, 3 sections of the brain. The first is the forebrain towards the front, and it has 2 sections, the telencephalon, where the cerebrum lies, and the diencephalon, where the thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland lie. Then you have your midbrain, and that is also called the mesencephalon, right there. And then towards the back, you have your hind brain. That's divided into the metencephalon and the myelencephalon. So here is where the pons and the cerebellum are. And then you have your medulla oblongata, where nerves cross over from your left to your right hemispheres and allows you to receive and send information to the rest of your body. So that is the end of that section. Let's move on to the brain and the spinal cord. As you know, your brain is extremely important. It keeps you alive, but also influences who you are to some degree, actually quite a bit. So for example, it affects your personality, how smart you are, which sports you excel at, and how emotional you are in your day-to-day life. And we'll get into that a bit more. There are 3 types of structures that help to protect your brain and your spinal cord. We have bones, meninges, and the cerebrospinal fluid. So we have the bones, and those are the bones of the cranium. That is a fancy word for skull. And that provides a hard protective layer around your brain. The vertebrae are bones that surround and support and protect your spinal cord. So here we get a diagram of the vertebra, or a vertebra. And you see how these bones are protecting the spinal cord. So we had bones, and then you have meninges. And these are protective layers of connective tissue between the bone and the soft tissue of the brain or spinal cord. So you got the bone and then a connective tissue layer known as the meninges. And there are 3 layers of this connective tissue known as the meninges. We have the dura mater, tough or hard mother. That's what that translates to. Dura, hard, mater, mother. And it's connected to the surrounding bone. Then we have the arachnoid mater. That literally means spidery mother. And it's a web of connective tissue that contains cerebrospinal fluid. Then we have the pia mater, and that means tender mother. It's tightly connected to the surface of the soft tissue of the brain or spinal cord. And you can see those here. Cerebrospinal fluid is a clear liquid that circulates around the brain through the central canal of the spinal cord and in the subarachnoid space. And that subarachnoid space is a hollow area or areas created by the web of the arachnoid matter layer. So you can see that here. Right. The cerebrospinal fluid, or the CSF, has several functions. It allows your heavy brain to float, it removes metabolic waste, and it distributes nutrients throughout the brain. Then we're going to talk about the anatomy of the spinal cord. The spinal cord is directly connected to the brain, and then it extends downward throughout your body. So your brain connected and then downward. And there are two portions of the spinal cord. You have your gray matter and your white matter. The gray matter is the butterfly-shaped central portion of the spinal cord. It's responsible for spinal reflexes, and this gray matter does not communicate with the brain. It's actually composed of nerve cell bodies, unmyelinated axons, dendrites, and neuroglia. Then you have your white matter, and that's the peripheral portion of the spinal cord. That is the neural link between your brain and the body. So this white matter is composed of parts of dendrites, myelinated axons, and associated neuroglia. Spinal nerves. As the spinal cord extends inferiorly down the vertebral column, it is segmented into 31 sections. Each section produces a pair of spinal nerves, and you have two median nerves, one that extends along each shoulder. Then you have two radial nerves. One extends down each arm, and then you have two sciatic nerves, and one extends down each of your legs. You can see that in this diagram. The medullary cone and cauda equine, the spinal cord begins to taper and ends at your first lumbar vertebra, or L1, and that is known as the medullary cone. So the first lumbar is where we know as the medullary cone. The nerve roots continue to extend inferiorly from the medullary cone, and then that forms the cauda equine, the horse's tail. That's where that name comes from. The structures of the spinal cord include gray matter, white matter, spinal nerves, medullary cone, and the cauda equine. Each of these structures is important for our bodies to function efficiently, and that's why they are protected by bones, meninges or connective tissue, and cerebrospinal fluid. And that's the end of that lesson. So we can then move on to issues. So what are some of the issues that can develop in the brain and the spine? As you have learned in the previous lessons we just looked at, the brain and the spine have a lot of important functions. And now we're going to look at what can go wrong when something happens to the central nervous system. These problems may be developmental problem, an injury, some type of disorder, or a degenerative disease. Now, a developmental problem means something goes wrong while the baby is still in the womb developing. So an example of that would be spina bifida. Spina bifida is a central nervous system developmental problem caused when the vertebral column does not close all of the way. So you see how this little open area, it should resemble the rest of this, but it's sticking out like that. Now, this is the most common permanent developmental problem in the United States. And it's estimated that in the US, 8 babies a day are born with spina bifida or a similar problem. Scientists are still unsure about the cause of spina bifida. It may be a combination of genetics and environmental issues. There is a link between spina bifida and lack of folic acid. So it's recommended that mothers take folic acid supplements before they conceive and at least during the first 3 months of pregnancy. There are 3 different types of spina bifida that differ by how severe the problem is. One type of spina bifida requires no treatment and has no noticeable adverse effects. And then the most severe type of spina bifida requires the newborn baby to have surgery within 2 to 3 days of birth. There is a medical procedure when they perform surgery on the baby while it is still in the womb. So that is another option. Individuals with spina bifida can lead a normal, fulfilling life. Some even choose to play sports. Some of the negative conditions associated with spina bifida include mental and social problems, difficulty walking or getting around, gastrointestinal problems, and obesity because, well, you're not able to move around as much as you would without spina bifida. Brain and spinal issues. Injuries. So an injury can also hurt your brain or your central nervous system, your spine. And that can be because of environmental factors, so things around you. The most common injury is a headache, and a headache may be caused by the blood vessels within the meninges of the brain enlarging. And that could be due to stress, eye strain, or fatigue, just body's just too tired. An example of a more severe injury is trauma to the spinal cord that results in nerve damage and paralysis. So paraplegia or quadriplegia. Paraplegia is when a traumatic injury occurs between T1 and L1 of the vertebral column. So here we have the T1 and then L1. And that results in paralysis or weakness of your legs. Paralysis is the loss of the ability to move a part of the body. Other conditions associated with paraplegia include the loss of physical sensation, bowel, bladder, and sexual problems. Very sad. Quadriplegia is when a traumatic injury occurs between C1 and C7 of the vertebral column. So here, it's a bit lower, but quadriplegia, that happens higher up on your spinal column. And the result of this type of injury is paralysis or weakness of both arms and legs. This may affect everything below the site of the injury. With paraplegia and quadriplegia, the injury is considered either complete or incomplete. So by that means if it's complete, the spinal cord is not able to send or receive any neural impulses. But an incomplete injury means that some neural impulses are actually able to be sent and received. So you are able to sense and feel some things and move certain parts of your body. Then we have disorders. An example of a disorder of the central nervous system is epilepsy. Epilepsy is characterized by the affected individual suffering from reoccurring seizures due to uncontrolled waves of electrical activity through the brain. Epilepsy may be caused by genetics, a head injury, a tumor in your brain, an infection, or by some unknown cause. Epilepsy cannot be cured yet, but it is efficiently treated with medication. So some of the conditions associated with epilepsy include unusual emotions, abnormal sensations, violent muscle spasms, loss of consciousness. Degenerative diseases. Alzheimer's disease is an example of a degenerative disease of the central nervous system. And if you recall what degenerative disease means, that means the illness or disease gets worse and worse as time goes on. And in the case of Alzheimer's, the individual gradually experiences mental deterioration. Deterioration, that means their mental state gets worse. They're unable to remember certain things. They don't recognize certain people, that type of thing. Conditions associated with that are memory loss, decline in being able to think and reason, and your behavior actually changes. If you've had a family member deal with this type of issue, they almost feel like a slightly different person. Yeah. So they may have moments where they seem like your normal grandmother, and then at other times they react completely differently, and it's very strange. Strange thing to experience, I'm sure, for them and you. But here's what a healthy brain looks like. Then we have a mild case of Alzheimer's, and then severe Alzheimer's. Interesting. I feel like those pictures should be flipped because that looks worse than this one does. Anyway. Right? Yeah, if this is two normal halves and that's one normal half and then an Alzheimer's and then this is two. Yeah, this diagram's wrong. I'll say it. Anyway, as Alzheimer's disease looks or progresses, your brain looks less and less like a brain, like a full brain. It gets smaller and smaller. Now, the cure for Alzheimer's disease is unknown. There are treatments available to treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and research continues to look for ways to prevent it, delay the onset, and also better ways to treat it. You can learn more about it by visiting the field trip. Interesting. There are several problems and issues associated with a damaged central nervous system. We talked about a few of those issues: spina bifida, headaches, paraplegia, quadriplegia, epilepsy, and Alzheimer's. And that is the end of that. Sorry to end on such a down note, a bummer. But that is the end of the lesson for section 4.1 of the central nervous system. I hope you learned something about the central nervous system. It's a very interesting part of your body, and I encourage you to learn more about it if any of this interests you. And I guess check out the field trip too. I haven't checked that out, but I'll check out that and then maybe post that after this. But anyway, I hope you guys have a great week, great day, great weekend, whenever you watch this. And I will see you guys next time. That is all for now. Bye-bye.